Hello and welcome to my presentation. My name is Karlyn King and I am a PhD music student at the University of Birmingham. You can contact me on Twitter, Karlyn L. King, or at the university itself, and my topic is around authenticity of music formats, specifically looking at the vinyl format. So this is what I'm going to discuss. I'm going to look at what does this mean, this idea of authenticity in the context of music formats. I'm going to present some field work that I've conducted over the past year, which has been split into three camps really: long-term consumers, the environment aspect, and the impact on new consumers, and whether or not ultimately this idea of authenticity matters for those who are consuming music on vinyl. So, to start off, Nick Mason from Pink Floyd, a band considered by many 1970s music fans to be from the golden era of conceptual music, claims that the vinyl record is the equivalent of whether you have the tea bag or the Japanese tea ceremony. The tea ceremony is the right way to approach music. This is a really interesting quote to start with because, as Sarah Thornton said, authenticity is arguably the most important value ascribed to popular music. So authenticity is a valued aspect of, for example, the brand of Record Store Day, and it's used by their marketing team and aimed at consumers to argue for the consumption of vinyl or other mediums, and conversely perceived as inauthentic marketing hype by some retailers and consumers who are anti-Record Store Day. But that's a whole other chapter. So historically, authenticity was considered to relate to things, people, or places with supernatural powers, often related to Middle Ages, and sacred items associated with religion, considered to be an absolute truth. For example, statues associated with the church and their ability to beget miracles. This criteria is focused on things like date, craft, usage, design, and the non-authentic or fake was linked with being morally wrong or sacrilegious. With the shift to Western science, we saw a more empirical search for the authentic, yet this idea of aura, this notion discussed by Walter Benjamin, persists and remains in terms of such judgments of authenticity. So in terms of music, recorded music, the pre-gramophone, 19th century, initially ascribed authenticity to the live performance. And as recordings slowly became more prolific and accepted, labels on records claiming high fidelity appealed to the consumer as a perceived solution to losing this authentic representation of the live performer. Therefore, fidelity intersects with authenticity in that it's used to convey the same experience of real, true, connected to the artist. So then vinyl records become assimilated into authentic music culture. For example, when they become vital to the communal experience of the record hop in the 50s, or if they're used as a means of live instrumentation in dance or hip hop genres to this day. So this presents two levels of authenticity. It presents Walter Benjamin's mysterious, enduring aura that he himself foretold. Cult value does not give way without resistance. Even though he claimed that anything that was reproduced was invalid as being authentic, this idea has somehow translated to certain items like vinyl, and it endures. Benjamin's main premise was that the reproductive medium is not the art in itself, but a carrier or copy, detaching the object from the source. Aura being the true sense of the art, the true essence, or the original form of truth, according to Plato. Everything else is simulation or diluted. Many new vinyl records sold today, which are digitally mastered, would therefore be considered less authentic and more diluted. Or if we're going to talk about Baudrillard, they would be considered third order simulations than the original incarnations. But for Benjamin, these things could never be authentic. This is really interesting because somehow this idea of aura has been taken as a marketing concept utilised by terms like high fidelity, and the locus of authenticity is then transferred to newer versions of vinyl today. Sarah Thornton would argue recording technologies did not therefore corrode or demystify aura as much as disperse and relocate it. That is, authenticity is still perceived as technology moves forward as more present in certain mediums, such as new, exclusive and rare records, for example. As high fidelity concepts endure in this day and age. So in terms of the field work that I've conducted on this, so I've looked at long-term consumers and also newer consumers. Longer-term consumers were predominantly 3 white males over 40 who owned record stores or audio equipment stores. They were also DJs, distributors to the music industry. Therefore, vinyl records dominated their employment and leisure time. The newer consumers were predominantly 2 focus groups. Group 1 were a group of music students studying music performance based in London. They were 12 male, 3 female, and all white apart from 1 mixed race male. Age range was 20 to 25. The second focus group consisted of 7 participants aged 17 to 25, 6 male and 1 female, all white apart from 1 mixed race male, all based in Edinburgh. It's been suggested that individuals form a self-concept and musical preference between the age of 18 to 24. Therefore, the practices could represent their consumption patterns for life. The fieldwork data provides support for consumption rituals being more present for the longer-term consumers, such as seeking out records, acquiring and paying for them, using them, listening to them, displaying and sharing them. And for them, this correlates to interpersonal levels of authenticity in consumption of music. This idea of an objective, mysterious aura is present in their belief system, as is the influence of the music industries and having a sense of agency over how their music is consumed. So for these consumers, they correspond to Baudrillard's third order simulacra in that the signs, in this case vinyl records, become the person via employment and leisure time. They go beyond a second order representation and they seek a congruent relationship with the music that they consume. For the newer consumers, consumption rituals were much less complex, with most subjects using streaming platforms and not actually questioning the authenticity of this. Some did purchase vinyl, and the rituals included a reverence for music of the pre-digital era, a preference to support artists by buying their vinyl, and the ritual of display. This also corresponds to this interpersonal level of authentic music consumption. However, aura was much less pronounced in this framework, in a secondary way for those who identified the golden era of music as being on vinyl long-playing records. The influence of the music industries is present, but not overly conscious, and they don't really map onto any sort of Baudrillardian level, as music consumption does not link with their own self-autonomy in the way that it did for the longer-term consumers. So let's look at them. So in terms of unravelling the social hieroglyphics that are inherent to vinyl record authenticity, I sampled participants who actively engage with such codes. One participant was the senior member of a high-end audio equipment store in Glasgow, and also a very well-established club owner and DJ, participating predominantly in disco, house, jazz, soul, electronic and ambient music. He is white and he is a man, and aged 40. For him, vinyl was authentic due to a combination of the physicality, the tangibility, the cover design, and having to pay more money for it, rather than £10 a month on the average streaming platform. In his words, it was another mindset and an informed choice. He said, you have to really like the artist and you will listen to it more without skipping tracks. Vinyl forces the label and the artist to produce something good. Having a record out is more authentic because it's a commitment financially, effort and time-wise. On the whole, if the music is good enough to go on vinyl, that gives it authenticity. He then did clarify that this is not always the case, but having a track on vinyl is a qualifier in that the likelihood is it will be worthwhile and worth listening to from his subjective opinion. He said he doesn't look at new releases digitally as, in his own words, I don't have time to go through tact. This suggests that a medium that takes up more physical space has a stronger visibility and monetary value, equating to a more truthful and authentic musical experience. The association of an artist or label with vinyl adds value to the process of recording and releasing music. Vinyl becomes the credible choice, signalling knowledge and discernment via commitment. This was corroborated by the owner of a record store in Glasgow, white man, aged 40, specialising in kind of indie independent music. He said that vinyl represents a direct link back to the original format of how much of the great classic music was released and recorded and presented to the public. The format itself seems so iconic in terms of look, feel and sound that this all lends itself to perceived authenticity, which is exploited by the record industry and retailers to sell the music. This was really interesting because it reveals vectors of authenticity that together contribute to what he calls perceived authenticity, suggesting that he's aware that it's a construct as opposed to some sort of Benjaminian or Platonic aura. These vectors include a return to a time when music was perceived as great. For him, this refers to 1960s and 70s counterculture rock and pop, Bowie, Simon and Garfunkel, Rolling Stones. Whereas for the other participant, this was the Beatles, the Stones, Bowie, but also jazz and Kraftwerk. Again, it's music that is all released pre the end of the 80s. Music was limited on a side of vinyl to 45 minutes. This may indicate a more selective track listing and concept, as these albums were made to be listened to from start to finish. Also, there was no access to unlimited libraries of music online, so the consumer had less selection to wade through. So I now speculate that consumers engaged more intently with what they did have access to. And lastly, the emergence of CDs and then MP3s led to reduced supply and demand for vinyl. And the financial impact of piracy also contributed to the reduction in vinyl. Therefore, it's been solidified as this bygone classic era. This quote also reveals the interpersonal use of vinyl as a contributor to perceptions of authenticity, in that he would display his collection at home, and he acknowledges that such usage embeds itself in our daily lives and notes how digital streaming platforms are capitalising on this via convenience. He also acknowledged the resurgence in vinyl records and how the music industry and retailers like himself are exploiting these perceived notions of authenticity. In terms of artwork, the iconography, which at the time may have been taken for granted, is a contributor to authenticity for both subjects. There's also the dark side of this notion of authenticity. The first participant did feel that the word had snobbish connotations. He said that record collecting in itself is snobbish. The idea of limited runs doesn't make it authentic. The idea of making something rare to build hype around is pretty snidey and cynical. I can see through the marketing in that. A limited run of 300 will only sell 300 when you could actually sell 10,000. What this tells me is that forced scarcity is seen as being aimed at inauthentic consumers who will buy into this idea of limited supply ideology. Sharing records and more of a community experience was seen by both participants as the more authentic choice. And this idea of snobbery, for example, destroying the label on a record so that other people couldn't see who it was by, and a DJ could have the upper hand in terms of choice and selection, was described as completely anathema for these participants. Onto the environment. For the actual environment of the record shop, my fieldwork indicated that authenticity is constructed by a respect for pre-1980s CD emergence. The original intention of the format, the cover art, the physicality, the analogue production, and playback technology, sharing records within a group, knowledge of records is central, and a sense of agency in music consumption practice. The environment of a record store is the front region of staged authenticity, signalling a performance, whether staged or organic, where social interactions around vinyl consumption take place. This is tied in with the design of the store, the music played in the store, the social engagement practices and the social skills in the store, the approach to customer service, and the knowledge of the staff. This all plays a key part in shaping the authenticity of the store. Therefore, they're much more than retail outlets. The front region of the store is a social space where the staff are legitimised as authentic experts in their field. They're imbued with a cultural capital by merely being employed there, or owning a store, or being in an advisory position to the humble customer. This ideology is unconscious when you enter the social space, as it's set up to dictate the flow of information and serve to naturalise professorial authority, as Hebdig explained. I looked at one very highly respected dance music store in Glasgow. Interestingly, they did not have the typical raised counter, but they had a PC and a chair in the centre of the room. Staff tended to not sit there unless ordering stock or answering emails or the telephone. And this potentially put customers more at ease in the store, who would approach a member of staff if they need help, but in a much more organic social space. The kind of unspoken ideology and irony is that the staff are all highly respected members of the dance music community, imbued with a discerning taste and knowledge that legitimises their status. This is consciously known to the regulars, but not known to the non-regulars so much, who have to figure it out when they're actually in the space. And they then become assimilated into a consensual hegemony of staff as authentic experts or cultural elites. I then looked at a punk store based in Edinburgh, run by a white man aged 45. They do stock predominantly rock and punk, but also metal, blues, Motown, reggae, soul, rock and roll, folk, jazz, and alternative. When I indicated that the design of the store indicated a punk rock vibe or horror-esque design, he said, "I really like that you think of us as being punk. I'm pretty laid back and I don't really do anything to generate an image," which I suppose does make it punk. I also play a big variety of musical genres, so if you base your perception of the shop on what you hear when you happen to be in it, we could be anything: punk, reggae, soul, jazz, metal, folk, blues, and so on. So what this tells me is that he wants his customers to associate him with the punk ideology of being non-commercial, non-contrived, and non-conforming. He also accepts that the music being played in store also dictates what the ideology will be perceived as, and he's comfortable with that being a variety of popular genres associated with the alternative. This tells the customer not to commit to a social faux pas by asking for commercial pop chart music, as this is not considered an authentic choice by the environmental layout. Also, the alignment with a more subversive ideology coincides with the earlier participants' perception of vinyl as a more rebellious choice. I'm now going to discuss newer consumers. In the first group, it was revealed that new consumers differ on the gradings of authenticity. However, they do agree on certain markers. In group 1, 6 out of the 15 participants purchased records. The 9 who did not buy records felt that streaming on Spotify was more convenient. They felt that having to invest in a record player and only owning one copy of a record was a disadvantage. And this indicates that having a digital file or stream on various devices, such as phones and laptops, evokes a sense of abundant access to multiple copies for the consumer. Having to choose carefully and the costs involved was also a common reason not to buy vinyl. One participant clarified that, "I saw a signed Dermot Kennedy vinyl at a gig, but it was £25. That's too expensive, but I came very close to getting it." This personal autograph signals an enhanced value, but the price premium prevented the sale. This is in contrast with the long-term enthusiasts who identify cost and paying the cost as a key marker of authenticity. With online streaming platforms, the premium monthly cost or the free ad-based freemium option allows unlimited access to extensive libraries of music with the option to download to use offline. However, this financial model is more akin to what is seen as an outdated media consumption model of renting movies or borrowing books from a library, albeit without the added tangibility of the actual book or video. This has been described by Sinclair and Tinson as a post-ownership economy. However, they did find in their study that a sense of ownership and place could be associated with the online streaming platform. They do feel feelings of investment, abundant ownership, and authenticity with affordable free or £5 to £10 a month streaming platforms. And this renders the authenticity of vinyl as less pronounced or relevant to this group. However, 3 of the group absolutely would invest in vinyl to support the artist. One said, "Records are cool to support the artist, but it's too easy to buy on Spotify. But as a musician, if it works as a concept album, I would like to release on vinyl, but if each song is individual, I would just use Spotify." For the second group, there were similarities. However, they did exhibit one behaviour found in the long-term group in that they were aware of the construct of cool. They would look for markers of authenticity, such as one who had a certificate of authenticity in a vinyl record album by American Head Charge. For him, this signalled the real and the authentic. One participant associated vinyl with liveness as a marker of authenticity. She said, "It sounds live. You had to be a good band to make records. The live takes meant that you had to be at the higher standards." This corresponds with the earlier longer-term consumer. It's a mark of legitimacy and a qualifier for authenticity. This group also participated in CDs, and they did actually align this with a level of authenticity that has not yet been explored by this research. However, vinyl remained the top choice over the CD. Overall, the results show that for younger consumers, qualifiers such as respect for classic music, supporting the artist, and cover art did remain important, while expensive high-end equipment was not. Record Store Days sells all three of these things in its curated releases, and it appears that some markers of authenticity endure, while others evolve or become less important. So to conclude, if we return to the Pink Floyd Nick Mason tea metaphor, tea as a multimodal sensory experience was historically seen as an expensive signifier of taste, distinction, community, and high class. This was in opposition to the generic instant tea bag, and this provides an analogy for vinyl records over digital music consumption. Vinyl is expensive. It's considered premium, signalling higher value, discernment, quality, and merit. However, much like tea, it has become much more ubiquitous and affordable. This breaks down the signifiers of exclusivity, taste, wealth, and knowledge. The younger consumers exemplify this, in that the higher costs of vinyl are acknowledged, but overly expensive playback hardware is no longer vital. Expert genre knowledge is replaced with anything from the classic album canon. The tiered levels of access, knowledge, and appreciation are dissolved. Function is no longer essential, and validation is less important. Cultural capital will be awarded for merely having a classic design hanging on your wall. Levels of interpersonal use become less rigid. Legislated nostalgia is identified but not necessarily engaged with. Supporting a favourite artist takes precedence over exerting consumer agency. And the perceived construct of authenticity is acknowledged, but built around respect for the golden era of music and vinyl. Knowledge, seriousness, and community no longer hold merit for the newer consumer. Thank you for listening, and I would be more than happy to answer any questions.